Chapter 24, Part 6 of Volume 3 of A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Volume 3 of A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times by Francois Guizot, translated by Robert Black. Chapter 24, The 100 Years' War, Charles VII and Joan of Arc, 1422 to 1462, Part 6. When the Bishop of Beauvais, installed at Rouen, set about forming his court of justice, the majority of the members he appointed amongst the clergy or the University of Paris obeyed his summons without hesitation. Some few would have refused, but their wishes were overruled. The abbot of Jumieges, Nicolas de Houppeville, maintained that the trial was not legal. The Bishop of Beauvais, he said, belonged to the party which declared itself hostile to the Maid, and, besides, he made himself judge in a case already decided by his metropolitan, the Archbishop of Rheims, of whom Beauvais was holden, and who had approved of Joan's conduct. The bishop summoned before him the recalcitrant, who refused to appear, saying that he was under no official jurisdiction but that of Rouen. He was arrested and thrown into prison, by order of the bishop, whose authority he denied. There was some talk of banishing him, and even of throwing him into the river, but the influence of his brethren saved him. The sub-inquisitor himself allowed the trial in which he was to be one of the judges to begin without him, and he only put in an appearance at that express order of the inquisitor general, and on a confidential hint that he would be in danger of his life if he persisted in his refusal. The court being thus constituted, Joan, after it had been put in possession of the evidence already collected, was cited on the 20th of February, 1431, to appear on the morrow, the 21st, before her judges assembled in the chapel of Rouen Castle. The trial lasted from the 21st of February to the 30th of May, 1431. The court held 40 sittings, mostly in the chapel of the castle, some in Joan's very prison. On her arrival there, she had been put in an iron cage. Afterwards she was kept no longer in the cage, but in a dark room in a tower of the castle, wearing irons upon her feet, fastened by a chain to a large piece of wood, and guarded night and day by 4 or 5 soldiers of low grade. She complained of being thus chained, but the bishop told her that her former attempts at escape demanded this precaution. "It is true," said Joan, as truthful as heroic, "I did wish, and I still wish to escape from prison, as is the right of every prisoner." At her examination, the bishop required her to take an oath to tell the truth about everything as to which she should be questioned. "I know not what you mean to question me about. Perchance you may ask me things I would not tell you. Touching my revelations, for instance, you might ask me to tell something I have sworn not to tell. Thus I should be perjured, which you ought not to desire." The bishop insisted upon an oath, absolute and without condition. "You are too hard on me," said Joan. "I do not like to take an oath to tell the truth save as to matters which concern the faith." The bishop called upon her to swear on pain of being held guilty of the things imputed to her. "Go on to something else," said she. And this was the answer she made to all questions which seemed to her to be a violation of her right to be silent. Wearied and hurt at these imperious demands, she one day said, "I come on God's business, and I have naught to do here. Send me back to God from whom I come." "Are you sure you are in God's grace?" asked the bishop. "If I be not," answered Joan, "please God to bring me to it; and if I be, please God to keep me in it." The bishop himself remained dumbfounded. There is no object in following through all its sittings and all its twistings this odious and shameful trial, in which the judges' prejudiced servility and scientific subtlety were employed for 3 months to wear out the courage or overreach the understanding of a young girl of 19, who refused at one time to lie, and at another to enter into discussion with them, and made no defence beyond holding her tongue or appealing to God, who had spoken to her and dictated to her that which she had done. In order to force her from her silence or bring her to submit to the Church, instead of appealing from it to God, it was proposed to employ the last means of all, torture. On the 9th of May the bishop had Joan brought into the great tower of Rouen Castle. the instruments of torture were displayed before her eyes, and the executioners were ready to fulfil their office, for to bring her back, said the bishop, into the ways of truth, in order to ensure the salvation of her soul and body, so gravely endangered by erroneous inventions. Verily, answered Joan, if you should have to tear me limb from limb, and separate soul from body, I should not tell you aught else; and if I were to tell you aught else, I should afterwards still tell you that you had made me tell it by force. The idea of torture was given up. It was resolved to display all the armory of science in order to subdue the mind of this young girl, whose conscience was not to be subjugated. The chapter of Rouen declared that in consequence of her public refusal to submit herself to the decision of the Church as to her deeds and her statements, Joan deserved to be declared a heretic. The University of Paris, to which had been handed in the 12 heads of accusation resulting from Joan's statements and examinations, replied that, if, having been charitably admonished, she would not make reparation and return to union with the Catholic faith, she must be left to the secular judges to undergo punishment for her crime. Armed with these documents, the Bishop of Beauvais had Joan brought up, on the 23rd of May, in a hall adjoining her prison, and after having addressed to her a long exhortation, "Joan," said he, "if in the dominions of your king, when you were at large in them, a knight or any other, born under his rule and allegiance to him, had risen up, saying, 'I will not obey the king or submit to his officers,' would you not have said that he ought to be condemned? What then will you say of yourself, who were born in the faith of Christ and became by baptism a daughter of the Church and spouse of Jesus Christ, if you not obey the officers of Christ, that is, the prelates of the Church?" Joan listened modestly to this admonition, and confined herself to answering, "As to my deeds and sayings, what I said of them at the trial I do hold and mean to abide by. Think you that you are not bound to submit your sayings and deeds to the Church militant or to any other than God? The course that I always mentioned and pursued at the trial I mean to maintain as to that. If I were at the stake, and saw the torch lighted, and the executioner ready to set fire to the faggots, even if I were in the midst of the flames, I should not say aught else, and I should uphold that which I said at the trial even unto death." According to the laws, ideas, and practices of the time, the legal question was decided. Joan, declared heretic and rebellious by the Church, was liable to have sentence pronounced against her; but she had persisted in her statements, she had shown no submission. Although she appeared to be quite forgotten, and was quite neglected by the king whose coronation she had effected, by his councillors, and even by the brave warriors at whose side she had fought, the public exhibited a lively interest in her; accounts of the scenes which took place at her trial were inquired after with curiosity. Amongst the very judges who prosecuted her, many were troubled in spirit, and wished that Joan, by an abjuration of her statements, would herself put them at ease and relieve them from pronouncing against her the most severe penalty. What means were employed to arrive at this end? Did she really, and with full knowledge of what she was about, come round to the abjuration which there was so much anxiety to obtain from her? It is difficult to solve this historical problem with exactness and certainty. More than once, during the examinations and the conversations which took place at that time between Joan and her judges, she maintained her firm posture and her first statements. One of those who were exhorting her to yield said to her one day, "Thy king is a heretic and a schismatic." Joan could not brook this insult to her king. "By my faith," said she, "full well dare I both say and swear that he is the noblest Christian of all Christians, and the truest lover of the faith and the Church." "Make her hold her tongue," said the usher to the preacher, who was disconcerted at having provoked such language. Another day, when Joan was being urged to submit to the Church, Brother Isambard de la Pierre, a Dominican, who was interested in her, spoke to her about the council, at the same time explaining to her its province in the Church. It was the very first time when that of Bale had been convoked. "Ah!" said Joan, "I would fain surrender and submit myself to the council of Bale." The Bishop of Beauvais trembled at the idea of this appeal. "Hold your tongue in the devil's name," he said to the monk. Another of the judges, William Erard, asked Joan menacingly, "Will you abjure those reprobate words and deeds of yours?" "I leave it to the universal Church whether I ought to abjure or not." "That is not enough; you shall abjure at once or you shall burn." Joan shuddered. "I would rather sign than burn," she said. There was put before her a form of abjuration, whereby, disavowing her revelations and visions from heaven, she confessed her errors in matters of faith, and renounced them humbly. At the bottom of the document she made the mark of a cross. Doubts have arisen as to the genuineness of this long and diffuse deed in the form in which it has been published in the trial papers. 24 years later, in 1455, during the trial undertaken for the rehabilitation of Joan, several of those who had been present at the trial at which she was condemned, amongst others the usher Massot and the registrar Taquel, declared that the form of abjuration read out at that time to Joan and signed by her contained only 7 or 8 lines of big writing; and according to other witnesses of the scene it was an Englishman, John Calot, secretary of Henry VI., King of England, who, as soon as Joan had yielded, drew from his sleeve a little paper which he gave her to sign, and, dissatisfied with the marks she had made, held her hand and guided it so that she might put down her name, every letter. However that may be, as soon as Joan's abjuration had thus been obtained, the court issued, on the 24th of May, 1431, a definitive decree, whereby, after some long and severe strictures in the preamble, it condemned Joan to perpetual imprisonment, with the bread of affliction and the water of affliction, in order that she might deplore the errors and faults she had committed, and relapse into them no more henceforth. The Church might be satisfied, but the King of England, his councillors, and his officers were not. It was Joan living, even though a prisoner, that they feared. They were animated towards her by the 2 ruthless passions of vengeance and fear. When it was known that she would escape with her life, murmurs broke out amongst the crowd of enemies present at the trial. Stones were thrown at the judges. One of the Cardinal of Winchester's chaplains, who happened to be close to the Bishop of Beauvais, called him a traitor. "You lie," said the bishop. And the bishop was right; the chaplain did lie; the bishop had no intention of betraying his masters. The Earl of Warwick complained to him of the inadequacy of the sentence. "Never you mind, my lord," said one of Peter Cauchon's confidants; "we will have her up again." After the passing of her sentence Joan had said to those about her, "Come now, you churchmen amongst you, lead me off to your own prisons, and let me be no more in the hands of the English." "Lead her to where you took her," said the bishop, and she was conducted to the castle prison. She had been told by some of the judges who went to see her after her sentence that she would have to give up her man's dress and resume her woman's clothing, as the Church ordained. She was rejoiced thereat, forthwith, accordingly, resumed her woman's clothes, and had her hair properly cut, which up to that time she used to wear clipped round like a man's. When she was taken back to prison, the man's dress which she had worn was put in a sack in the same room in which she was confined, and she remained in custody at the said place in the hands of 5 Englishmen, of whom 3 stood by night in the room and 2 outside at the door. And he who speaks, John Massot, a priest, the same who in 1431 had been present as usher of the court at the trial in which Joan was condemned, knows for certain that at night she had her legs ironed in such a sort that she could not stir from the spot. When, the next Sunday morning, which was Trinity Sunday, had come, and she should have got up, according to what she herself told him who speaks, she said to her English guards, "Uniron me, I will get up." Then one of them took away her woman's clothes; they emptied the sack in which was her man's dress, and pitched the said dress to her, saying, "Get up then," and they put her woman's clothes in the same sack. And according to what she told me she only clad herself in her man's dress after saying, "You know it is forbidden me; I certainly will not take it." Nevertheless they would not allow her any other, insomuch that the dispute lasted to the hour of noon. Finally, from corporeal necessity, Joan was constrained to get up and take the dress. The official documents drawn up during the condemnation trial contain quite a different account. On the 28th of May, it is there said, 8 of the judges who had taken part in the sentence, their names are given in the document, paragraph 454, betook themselves to Joan's prison, and seeing her clad in man's dress, which she had but just given up according to our order that she should resume women's clothes, we asked her when and for what cause she had resumed this dress, and who had prevailed on her to do so. Joan answered that it was of her own will, without any constraint from any one, and because she preferred that dress to woman's clothes. To our question as to why she had made this change, she answered that, being surrounded by men, man's dress was more suitable for her than woman's. She also said that she had resumed it because there had been made to her, but not kept, a promise that she should go to mass, receive the body of Christ, and be set free from her fetters. She added that if this promise were kept she would be good, and would do what was the will of the Church. As we have heard some persons say that she persisted in her errors as to the pretended revelations which she had but lately renounced, we asked whether she had since Thursday last heard the voices of St. Catherine and St. Margaret, and she answered, yes. To our question as to what the saints had said, she answered, that God had testified to her by their voices great pity for the great treason she had committed in abjuring for the sake of saving her life, and that by so doing she had damned herself. She said that all she had thus done last Thursday in abjuring her visions and revelations she had done through fear of the stake, and that all her abjuration was contrary to the truth. She added that she did not herself comprehend what was contained in the form of abjuration she had been made to sign, and that she would rather do penance once for all by dying to maintain the truth than remain any longer a prisoner, being all the while a traitress to it. We will not stop to examine whether these two accounts, though very different, are not fundamentally reconcilable, and whether Joan resumed man's dress of her own desire, or was constrained to do so by the soldiers on guard over her, and perhaps to escape from their insults. The important points in the incident are the burst of remorse which Joan felt for her weakness, and her striking retraction of the abjuration which had been wrung from her. So soon as the news was noised abroad, her enemies cried, "She has relapsed!" This was exactly what they had hoped for, when, on learning she had been sentenced only to perpetual imprisonment, they had said, "Never you mind, we will have her up again." "Farewell, farewell, my lord," said the Bishop of Beauvais to the Earl of Warwick, whom he met shortly after Jane's retraction; and in his words there was plainly an expression of satisfaction, and not a mere phrase of politeness. On the 29th of May the tribunal met again. 40 judges took part in the deliberation. Joan was unanimously declared a case of relapse, was found guilty, and cited to appear next day, the 30th, on the Vieux Marche to hear sentence pronounced, and then undergo the punishment of the stake. When, on the 30th of May, in the morning, the Dominican brother Martin Ladvenu was charged to announce her sentence to Joan, she gave way at first to grief and terror. "Alas!" she cried, "am I to be so horribly and cruelly treated that this my body, full pure and perfect and never defiled, must to-day be consumed and reduced to ashes? Ah, I would 7 times rather be beheaded than burned!" The Bishop of Beauvais at this moment came up. "Bishop," said Joan, "you are the cause of my death. If you had put me in the prisons of the Church and in the hands of fit and proper ecclesiastical warders, this had never happened. I appeal from you to the presence of God." One of the doctors who had sat in judgment upon her, Peter Maurice, went to see her, and spoke to her with sympathy. "Master Peter," she said to him, "where shall I be to night?" "Have you not good hope in God?" asked the doctor. "Oh, yes," she answered; "by the grace of God I shall be in paradise." Being left alone with the Dominican, Martin Ladvenu, she confessed, and asked to communicate. The monk applied to the Bishop of Beauvais to know what he was to do. "Tell Brother Martin," was the answer, "to give her the Eucharist and all she asks for." At 9 o'clock, having resumed her woman's dress, Joan was dragged from prison and driven to the Vieux Marche. From 700 to 800 soldiers escorted the car and prohibited all approach to it on the part of the crowd, which encumbered the road and the vicinities; but a man forced passage and flung himself towards Joan. It was a canon of Rouen, Nicholas Loiseleur, whom the Bishop of Beauvais had placed near her, and who had abused the confidence she had shown him. Beside himself with despair, he wished to ask pardon of her; but the English soldiers drove him back with a violence and with the epithet of traitor, and but for the intervention of the Earl of Warwick his life would have been in danger. Joan wept and prayed, and the crowd afar off wept and prayed with her. On arriving at the place, she listened in silence to a sermon by one of the doctors of the court, who ended by saying, "Joan, go in peace; the Church can no longer defend thee; she gives thee over to the secular arm." The laic judges, Raoul Boutellier, baillie of Rouen, and his lieutenant, Peter Daron, were alone qualified to pronounce sentence of death, but no time was given them. The priest Massot was still continuing his exhortations to Joan, but, "How now, priest!" was the cry from amidst the soldiery; "are you going to make us dine here? Away with her! away with her!" said the baillie to the guards; and to the executioner, "Do thy duty." When she came to the stake, Joan knelt down completely absorbed in prayer. She had begged Massot to get her a cross; and an Englishman present made one out of a little stick, and handed it to the French heroine, who took it, kissed it, and laid it on her breast. She begged Brother Isambard de la Pierre to go and fetch the cross from the church of St. Sauveur, the chief door of which opened on the Vieux Marche, and to hold it upright before her eyes till the coming of death, in order, she said, that the cross whereon God hung might, as long as she lived, be continually in her sight; and her wishes were fulfilled. She wept over her country and the spectators as well as over herself. "Rouen, Rouen," she cried, "is it here that I must die? Shalt thou be my last resting place? I fear greatly thou wilt have to suffer for my death." It is said that the aged Cardinal of Winchester and the Bishop of Beauvais himself could not stifle their emotion, and, peradventure, their tears. The executioner set fire to the fagots. When Joan perceived the flames rising, she urged her confessor, the Dominican brother, Martin Ladvenu, to go down, at the same time asking him to keep holding the cross up high in front of her, that she might never cease to see it. The same monk, when questioned 24 years later, at the rehabilitation trial, as to the last sentiments and the last words of Joan, said that to the very latest moment she had affirmed that her voices were heavenly, that they had not deluded her, and that the revelations she had received came from God. When she had ceased to live, two of her judges, John Alespie, canon of Rouen, and Peter Maurice, doctor of theology, cried out, "Would that my soul were where I believe the soul of that woman is!" And Tressart, secretary to King Henry VI., sorrowfully, on returning from the place of execution, "We are all lost; we have burned a saint." A saint indeed in faith and in destiny. Never was human creature more heroically confident in, and devoted to, inspiration coming from God, a commission received from God. Joan of Arc sought naught of all that happened to her and of all she did, nor exploit, nor power, nor glory. It was not her condition, as she used to say, to be a warrior, to get her king crowned, and to deliver her country from the foreigner. Everything came to her from on high, and she accepted everything without hesitation, without discussion, without calculation, as we should say in our times. She believed in God and obeyed him. God was not to her an idea, a hope, a flash of human imagination, or a problem of human science. He was the Creator of the world, the Saviour of mankind through Jesus Christ, the Being of beings, ever present, ever in action, sole legitimate sovereign of man whom he has made intelligent and free, the real and true God whom we are painfully searching for in our own day, and whom we shall never find again until we cease pretending to do without him and putting ourselves in his place. Meanwhile one fact may be mentioned which does honor to our epoch and gives us hope for our future. 4 centuries have rolled by since Joan of Arc, that modest and heroic servant of God, made a sacrifice of herself for France. For 24 years after her death, France and the king appeared to think no more of her. However, in 1455, remorse came upon Charles VII. And upon France. Nearly all the provinces, all the towns, were freed from the foreigner, and shame was felt that nothing was said, nothing was done, for the young girl who had saved everything. At Rouen, especially, where the sacrifice was completed, a cry for reparation arose. It was timidly demanded from the spiritual power which had sentenced and delivered over Joan as a heretic to the state. Pope Calixtus III. entertained the request preferred, not by the King of France, but in the name of Isabel Romee, Joan's mother, and her whole family. Regular proceedings were commenced and followed up for the rehabilitation of the martyr, and on the 7th of July, 1456, a decree of the court assembled at Rouen quashed the sentence of 1431, together with all its consequences, and ordered a general procession and solemn sermon on St. Ouen Place and the Vieux Marche, where the said maid had been cruelly and horribly burned, besides the planting of a cross of honor, Crucis Honesti, on the Vieux Marche, the judges reserving the official notice to be given of their decision throughout the cities and notable places of the realm. The city of Orleans responded to this appeal by raising on the bridge over the Loire a group in bronze representing Joan of Arc on her knees before Our Lady between two angels. This monument, which was broken during the religious wars of the 16th century, and repaired shortly afterwards, was removed in the 18th century; and Joan of Arc then received a fresh insult: the poetry of a cynic was devoted to the task of diverting a licentious public at the expense of the saint whom, 3 centuries before, fanatical hatred had brought to the stake. In 1792 the council of the Commune of Orleans, considering that the monument in bronze did not represent the heroine's services, and did not by any sign call to mind the struggle against the English, ordered it to be melted down and cast into cannons, of which one should bear the name of Joan of Arc. It is in our time that the city of Orleans and its distinguished bishop, Monseigneur du Panloup, have at last paid Joan homage worthy of her, not only by erecting to her a new statue, but by recalling her again to the memory of France with her true features and in her true character. Neither French nor any other history offers a like example of a modest little soul, with a faith so pure and efficacious, resting on divine inspiration and patriotic hope. Chapter 24.